We're speaking with Maria Zornes Baker, daughter of Milford Zornes, and the wife of Hal Baker, who is writing a biography of your
Yeah.
father.
Yes, he is.
How does that feel?
Actually, it's been fascinating for me because I've learned probably more about my father than I ever knew before. And having Hal involved in that's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed the conversations that we've had along the lines of, well, do you remember this or do you remember that? And a lot of times I don't. I don't have a clue. And also reading some of my father's journals and seeing his notes and so forth has really been quite eye-opening and a real treat to really get to know him, because I can't say that I really knew him growing up. I think I began to understand and get to know him better as an adult, but still there was a whole world that I didn't know about.
Well, of course, nobody really knows their parents.
That's exactly right.
Because they are your
Too close.
parents.
Yes,
yeah.
exactly.
And we, as adults, we have a new perspective on
Yes.
them. It always changes. But of course, you probably didn't realize that your father was relatively famous. He was a nationally known figure.
I did not know.
He was just dad.
He was dad. And in fact, it wasn't really until I was probably in junior high that I really zeroed in on the fact that painting was his career, and he wasn't just having fun. I mean, he enjoyed it, obviously, but I could never figure out what his career was. I'd go to class and we'd have a parents' day, and kids would get up and talk about, so-and-so's dad is a lawyer and so-and-so's mother's an attorney or a chef or something. I really didn't know what my dad was, and in the third grade, I just broke down and said, well, he's an Eskimo, because he had just sent me an Eskimo doll from Greenland. So my mother heard about that. And I think she finally maybe decided that I needed a better understanding of what my father did for a living. And so it was kind of an evolution for me to get to truly understand his passion, why he traveled so much, and why he was gone so much. And my mother was very good at, once she realized I was kind of confused, setting me straight as to really what our life was about. And I think then, truly, in high school, I began to have a much better feel for his status and his passion and his need to keep growing as an artist and changing as an artist. And things never stayed the same at our house. And got to understand his passions for travel. And so in the end, I think I grew up with a really strong bond to a different sort of lifestyle than most of the kids had that I went to school with.
And travel was a major element of his life. It said he wanted to travel, and he always did.
And he always did.
Even though he had numerous homes in Claremont and stayed in Utah for a number of years,
yes.
He traveled.
That's it.
Every home was a base.
Exactly.
From which to go travel.
Exactly. Yeah. And he instilled that love of travel in me, and that's one of the things I've enjoyed in my lifetime, to be able to share with him my travels. And when he went to Uganda, I was very pleased, because I had been to Africa several times, and I had always wanted him to go to Africa because of the landscape and the people are so incredible. So I was very pleased when he went to Uganda, and the paintings that he did there were magnificent.
Now, even when he was, I'll say, at home in Claremont, mm-hmm. he couldn't just sit in the backyard and paint.
No. As a young kid, my job was to keep the cat from walking over his paintings. That was my job. Also, I had at my fingertips paint and pencils and paintbrushes to utilize anytime I wished. And I did. I did a whole lot of little paintings and so forth. But that's what he did at home. I don't know that I saw him very often without a pen, pencil, or paintbrush. When we would go out to dinner, if there was a paper tablecloth, it was covered by the time we were done. Always carried a pencil with him. So.
And as a teenager, when you learned to drive, you could drive him to his little trips.
I did, and growing up too, I remember trips that we would take, or he would say, "Let's take a drive for the day." After a while, I learned that those could last 2 days, and I might not end up at school on Monday. So I always remembered to pack all my, things that I wanted to keep me busy, and we would go off. He would find a place to paint, and we might stay there for the weekend and come back the following week. So life was kind of exciting. I never knew where I might end up. One such trip was to Arizona. And while we were in Arizona, we passed a fellow on the side of the road, obviously drunk, Indian. And my father picked him up and put him in the back seat with me, and we drove him to the reservation. And they were so pleased that somebody found their long-lost tribal member, and were very appreciative of my father, and he set up his painting and started to paint, and everybody came around and watched, and the chief was so pleased that he eventually made my father a turquoise ring. So, and I played with Indian kids for a couple of days. So I did have there were some very exciting points in time.
Tell me about Claremont. Was Claremont always your home? I know
Yes.
Milford traveled a lot, but Claremont was where you
Yeah,
were.
I think my mother she had traveled a lot in her school days, and she felt it was important to stay in one place. So yes, I went from kindergarten to 12th grade in Claremont. And living where we lived with other artists, that whole art world I was involved in without really realizing how important any of these people really were, or how important their art was to to the movement at that time. And there were artists with various talents. So I was exposed to ceramicists, I was exposed to sculptors, I was exposed to weavers.
And they were all parents of your friends.
Yes.
You all went to
yes,
school together.
We all went to school together. I went to school with Tony Sheets, but at the time I didn't realize who he was because I had never really met him. It wasn't until later in life that we realized that we'd gone to school together and we were in the same class. There was a couple of boys, Hispanic boys, that my dad really took a shining to. They are the Martinez brothers, and Richard Martinez was in my class, and whether it was because of Richard or because the school really utilized the artists in the community, my dad was one that came into the school, elementary school and intermediate school, and gave art lessons, or I remember one time he came to a dance, and he sat over in the corner and he was doing little portraits of the students. And so he was very involved with the school. So yeah, it was, Claremont, I think really it was a wonderful little microcosm of some very, very interesting people. And because of the colleges, you had writers, you were exposed to writers. I would often go down to a place, it used to be called the Sugar Shack, if I remember, the Sugar Bowl, excuse me, it was called the Sugar Bowl. And basic, 1950s, 1960s soda fountain. And one day it was in there, and there was a beautiful lady strumming a guitar and singing, and then her sister came in and started singing with her. It turned out it was Joan Baez and her sister. Her father was an exchange professor at one of the colleges, and didn't know her at the time, but certainly when I got well into the 60s, I knew who she was. So you never knew, looking back, you never knew who you're going to meet. And I'm very appreciative, I think, of that upbringing, because it has given me some real bases in life history, life experiences that I can share and I learned from. I learned a great deal from a number of those people.
Do you remember the Padua Art Fiesta at all?
Oh, absolutely. That was fun because it was just up the street. And I remember one time the painters would string their paintings up on a clothesline with clothesline clips. And they would leave them up overnight. And this was outdoors. And one night it started to rain. And my dad had to quick call folks and ran up, saved the pictures, and but yes, it was always a lot of fun. In fact, we went very often to see the Mexican players. They were a group of people in the area, dressed in the local costumes of Mexico, and they served real Mexican food. One of the things I liked was the hot milk at night. They had a special, I forget what it was called, but the ice cream and the hot, warm milk was some of my favorites. But I would play up at Padua Hills all the time, and I was there when they would set up, and in fact, most of the art kids would be up there, and we'd all be playing and so forth. So yeah, that was a very good memory.
Let's talk about how the Padua Art Fiesta has been reignited. I don't know what the right word is.
Yeah, it about 4 or 5 years ago, Catherine McIntosh, which is Harrison McIntosh's daughter, wanted to revive that fiesta, and by this time, several of the original artists had passed away, and what she brought together were all of us that were the kids of the artists, and she started the Art Kids group. And one of the first art fiestas that we did was to exhibit bits and pieces of art from all of the original artists. And it allowed them to also bring in the current artists to sell their work and show their work, just like they did back in the 50s. And she hoped that this would really take off. And over the years, they have highlighted one of the artists, one of the original artists. This year, my father will be the featured artist. But it certainly became very popular very quickly, and probably to their amazement, they were hoping for 400 people the first year. I think they got 600 right off the bat. And I think it's something that Claremont, having always been this art community, was really pleased to see revived, because it's an event, brings people in, and they can other folks can now learn about the art history of Claremont. So I'm really pleased, and it's still going.
It's very successful.
Yeah, very successful. So I hope it continues.
And deservedly so. I'm sure it will. Any thoughts about your mom? Milford, of course, was famous. various degrees of fame. He wasn't a Picasso,
Right.
but in the world of watercolor, he was
Yes.
probably the prominent name for the second half of the 20th century.
Yes. Yes.
But he had the support of your mom.
Yes. They agreed at some point in their marriage that she would give up her art career. Now, she was an artist in her own right. She was more of an illustrator. She worked at Disney. At one point, she drew Bambi and Flower. And again, that was something she had in common with my dad, because he worked at Disney for a very short period of time. But she did some very charming drawings and little watercolor paintings. But she decided that my father's work was important and he needed the support and the organization to move forward. And she did not seem to have a problem giving up. She drew now and then. Yeah, when they would travel, she'd take a little sketchbook, and we have many little sketches of that she did over the years. But her art became cooking, and she became quite a gourmet cook. At the time that she passed away, she had over 5,000 cookbooks.
Oh boy.
And my husband and I donated them all to the Cordon Bleu School. And they were amazed at the number of cookbooks. But she made that quite an art in her own right, which was also part and parcel of helping my father when he had people over to the house. Then she would serve an elegant meal, and so I think she saw that as part and parcel of helping him move forward or sell a picture or whatever might have been going on that evening.
Well,
so.
there's no question it was a family business.
Yes, yes.
And since artists don't make a lot of money in the first place, you really got to have that support.
And I never felt that. I have to say that it wasn't till I was really looking back over the years and seeing some of their financial papers that I realized that they really didn't have that much money, because I certainly didn't feel that. I was an only child, and I seemed to have everything I could have needed. So somehow, through the finagling of my mother probably, she was able to get the things that I thought I needed and wanted. And such things as braces, which I had, which were very expensive at the time, I was able to have them because my father traded paintings with the orthodontist. So, which he did on several occasions for any number of things. So there was that advantage, and I would walk into the orthodontist office one day, and there were all these beautiful Milford Zornes paintings in there. And, oh, this. So I never really felt, in all honesty, that there was any financial problems, but they did not have a lot of money.
What else do you remember being the daughter of a famous artist? Or not because you don't remember the fame necessarily, but what are your recollections of
Well, I think to answer that question, I look in terms of how that childhood affected me as an adult. I kind of think of it as being a blank slate, being fortunate to have a blank slate. There were no preconceptions on what my religion should be, what my feeling about people should be. Everything was sort of left to me to develop. So I had a chance to really work at developing myself, as opposed to having a lifestyle set for me, if you will. And a lot of that is because both my parents were very open about their attitudes on religion and politics and people. And I think I gleaned from them some of the best attitudes, in my opinion, on life and on people. And I feel very good about having to learn a lot of that on my own, because they didn't want to give me they didn't want to mold me into what they were. They wanted me to be my own person. And one of the things my father would always say is, you really need to be your own person doing your own thing. He had a way of dropping little words of wisdom along, which is something that I think made him so valuable and so well appreciated as a teacher, because he would always drop these little stories, and they always would have a meaning to them. And several of those little pearls I have carried with me most of my life. One of which was when I was probably about 6 or 7. I knew we were having people over to look at paintings and would probably buy a painting. And so I said to him, I should wear my worst dress and my most beat-up shoes so I look really poor, so the people will buy the painting. And he said, oh, no, you put on your best dress and your best shoes so that you look successful. Like we all need to look successful. We want to be winners, because people don't buy paintings from people that look like they're losers and put a lower value on the painting. People want to know that you're successful and they're buying something of great value. So I didn't quite understand what he said, but over time that stuck with me. And in my own career, I was managing an organization, and one of the first things I did was to convince everybody this was the greatest organization ever. And we became somewhat more successful because we all began to believe we were the best.
Well, your dad really was quite a philosopher.
He was.
And a talker. He loved to talk.
Loved to tell stories. He had all kinds of stories, from World War II, and not war stories, but fun stories about the people and about his experiences meeting people. And during his life, he met some very influential people. So it was always fun to hear everything he had to say. So, and you learn from that. You learn what people admire, and you try to follow through with that, which I've tried to do.
Great. Have you read the book?
Yes, I have.
What do you think?
I think it's a really fun read, mainly because I'm learning something as I was reading it. And of course, Hal would talk to me about it as we went along, but the finished product is really quite insightful. I think it's an easy read, but anyone who is interested in art, anyone that's interested in life and what somebody can bring to their lives I think it'll be read by not just artists, but different people who are just interested in other people and how they live their lives.
Maria, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.